Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is the Chain Bytes 360 podcast. This is a show for everything cryptocurrency, blockchain, technology related. On this episode, we're going to do an awesome interview with Jose Rodriguez. Eric Grill, I believe this is one of your close friends.
Yep.
Hey, good morning, and my name is Jeremy Snyder, the CEO of BTM Compliance, and I'm coming at you from our Chain Bytes 360 podcast. And today we have the pleasure of having a guest with us. His name is Jose Rodriguez. Jose Rodriguez is the director of BlockchainLand, also the CEO of Ajolote ATMs out of Mexico. He is the former CEO of a cryptocurrency exchange, Unisend Mexico, which was acquired by Bitso. And since 2013, Jose has become one of the main figures for Bitcoin in Mexico. You can find Jose everywhere, from participating in the various blockchain and cryptocurrency related events to the Mexican Senate. He's also recognized as a fintech investor, an author of cryptocurrency related articles, and is an avid blockchain promoter. Jose, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Awesome. Hey, well, I'm just going to go ahead and dive into this. We got a lot of stuff to cover. There's a really awesome amount of topics that you're involved with that I have a lot of questions on, and I'm excited to kind of get into them. But I think what everybody would love to know is kind of, how did you get started in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and the blockchain? And like, when was that, and how did you get involved?
I got involved full time in 2013. That's when I changed careers and did my first companies and went full in. But before that, I had explored Bitcoin. It was really early. Bitcoin started in 2009. Some friends showed me in 2011, 2012, and I was intrigued. But before they showed me, I had a career in financial services and financial markets for 15 years. So I worked in stockbrokers in Mexico and the US. And there I managed many of the biggest hedge funds, investment funds, and pension funds in Latin America. And some of the things that I specialized was moving securities and money internationally. What do I mean by that? Normally, big pension funds or retirement funds in Mexico and Latin America buy big packages of ETFs, which are stocks that represent an index in the stock market. And what they do is that they, for example, go and buy $1 billion out of a current stock that isn't locally available. So they do go to the United States, they buy it, and they take it to a local market. And that's a process that it's more common that in cryptocurrencies. It's called arbitrage, but this is called securities arbitrage. It's a little more complex because you need to move securities internationally through different systems and through different specialized financial systems that, for example, you handle things called vaults. That is, for example, DTC. In Mexico, you have Indeval. In South America, you have Cavalli, and each country has this different thing. So that was movements that I saw and that I executed and that I coordinated for years, for billions of dollars every day. And you had to be quick. You had a very tight schedule. Operations closed, and different countries and different systems closed at different times, etc. So it was really hard, and it was really pinpoint moving all these billions of dollars around the world. And I thought that's when I started seeing how all the international markets work and all the systems. And I thought there must be other ways, and I started exploring how things were done internationally. And there wasn't many options.
Right.
But I had explored many of them, and there were some that internationally, for example, Euroclear, DTC, Clearstream, which are the settlements and these securities vaults in Europe and the United States had been exploring, but well, everything's done very traditionally, mostly like it's had us operate for the last 30, 50, 100 years in most countries. And then is when a friend of mine in first 2011 told me about this thing called Bitcoin. And he told me like it's this internet money that you can move internationally, and you don't need the institutions. Okay, and I told him like show me, but at the time there wasn't any of the companies that we now know. Actually, there wasn't any exchanges. Like if you wanted to exchange Bitcoin, you needed to go into forums. You needed, for example, one of the earliest exchange that I saw was in Second Life, the virtual game, the MMORPG. Wow. So you could exchange Linden dollars for Bitcoin. That was one of the first exchanges that I saw. Also in forums like Bitcoin Talk, you saw people in your local countries that wanted to exchange, and maybe you met with them or you trusted. And if you didn't get scammed, you did an exchange. And then in 2012, this friend told me like, okay, let's it was in 2012 that I started investigating more. I didn't invest at the time, but I started investigating more, and I got really intrigued of things that were starting to happen. At the time, there weren't any big investors. There were only like angel investors and risky investors inside this space. But you started to see it work as money in different parts of the world, although it was very clumsy, especially to exchange. Then in 2012, 2013, many of the big first big companies that exploded came, like Silk Road. Also, you had other exchanges like Mt. Gox, that was the first big collapse that Bitcoin had. And you had all these first companies, but there weren't like reputable companies, and there were like all experimenting startups, and well, most of them crashed. And then by 2012, I was getting convinced that this technology could change financial services and financial systems in the world. So 2013, I went full time. I started doing events, investments, doing startups, traveling, and just got in. I still was working in stockbrokers, but I had a foot out, and I was getting convinced that this was the future. And then I started seeing my exit and went full time since then.
That's amazing. And so you were able to really, start your own exchange as the CEO that obviously was acquired by Bitso. When do you think that you made your very first purchase of Bitcoin?
My first official purchases to, let's say, using platforms, etc., was 2013. My first experiments, and when I started seeing it, how it worked and what a wallet was, etc., was 2012. And in 2013, I was very active. There were some markets like local Bitcoins that already existed. Local Bitcoins is a place where you can post offers to buy and sell locally in any country, even by transfer or by cash, and they give you an escrow service. So that was one of the first options that you had to exchange. So that is where I started meeting the first people. Also, there wasn't like a group, a community, meetups, anything. So we also started a Facebook group called Bitcoin Mexico. And we started also, I started also writing to people that I started to do frequent exchanges. Because I said if they're doing frequent exchanges, they're into this more than a casual or user. And there's where I started to know the first users in Mexico. There were some users that were in Mexico before me, but they were like very experimental or very just into the technological part or intrigued. And well, I started doing all this community, and then I said, well, Mexico needs an exchange. There were already some exchange going out. There was Coinbase in the States. Coinbase started, I think, in 2012 or 2013. There was already Phoenix, Bitstamp. Some of the big exchanges that we know were starting back then. And then I saw an opportunity for Mexico, but then I saw that no one in Mexico was creating this business. So I started exploring in other countries, and that's where I went and saw that Argentina was one of the top countries. It has been for the last 10 years. And they have a lot of startups, developers, interest, and also, well, their local economy has not been doing well for the last 20 years, so it also a very big incentive to run away from their currency, which has had an awful devaluation for the last 20 or more years. So I went to Argentina. I started contacting Argentinian community. I started through social networks. I started Facebook and Twitter contacting them and telling them I'm interested in knowing what you guys are doing, meeting
really
startups.
Growing the community.
Yeah, and I went over there for a couple of weeks. I did an agenda there, and I also told them, like, hey, I'm not a huge investor, but I'm interested in investing and bringing a company and running a company here in Mexico, and I'm willing to partner with whomever wants to do it. And I met lots of the startups that were at the time running over there. In Argentina, they had already like 15 startups. They had already incubated some startups with, for example, Draper Labs. They were one of the first generations. I mean, those were like the early, and also, for example, Barry Silver, TCG. They were like one of the first investments that they did were in Argentina, for example, in Latin America. So I went and met with all those guys, the community, and do very good friendship with them. And then I met Unisend, which was an Argentinian exchange at the time, and they had already been running for about 6 months. So they were one of the first exchanges in Latin America and in the world too. And then they told me that they were very interested in partnering with me. And so the deal that we did is we opened Unisend in Mexico, and I started being the CEO over there. So then we had operations in Mexico and Argentina. That was at the beginning of 2014 when we opened the exchange.
Okay. And when did Bitso acquire Unisend Mexico?
So at the time, before I was in Unisend, Pablo, which is one of the co-founders and at the time was the CEO of Bitso, he had contacted me because he had already seen that I was doing community startups, that I was that I was moving around, and that I was one of the few guys doing something with Bitcoin in Mexico. So before he had Bitso, he actually met me through a friend in common and invited me over to dinner and to talk and see what was my interest, what I was doing. And he told me that he was gonna do a startup here in Mexico, and that's cool. So then they opened in April 2014, and I opened in about July, like 3 months apart. We opened our exchanges, and there were other exchanges, but we were like the main competitors at the time. Like we were always like running for new users, activity, and at the time, really the volume was very small. I mean, we operated like between 5 to 10 bitcoins, and the price of Bitcoin was between $100 to $300.
And the community was still relatively new, but still very small.
Yeah,
still something
we were doing
growing.
like $1,000 to $5,000 a day, which is nothing for an exchange. But
Right.
well, we were the first one actually doing this, and users started growing. I mean, not as big as now, but you had 100 users, then you had 1,000 users, then you had 10,000 users, and going from zero to that. And then, so we started competing for partners, for investors, for users, etc. And we were like always professionally clashing. And then I started also meeting with the regulators. When I saw that this had the potential to actually be a financial system more than only a currency, I started writing to all the regulators that I had met through my career in stockbroker and banking. And I started meeting with them, and I, for example, had the first meeting with the Mexican Central Bank at the beginning of 2014. At the time, for example, Pablo was my competitor, and he was asking me to invite him to the meeting, and I was like, no, I'm not going to invite you because you're my competitor. And I really told him, like, no, you know what? I want everyone involved to come, so I invited everyone that I knew had some involvement. So besides being my competitor, I invited him over to the meeting, and that's also something that I saw in the stockbroker industry. and in the financial industry. Like, you can be huge competitors for competing for billions or trillions of dollars, but you still have an association. You still go as an industry. You still go together when you need to go to the regulator, when you need to go to important things. So I thought, like, yeah, like we can, instead of each one that's just hiding what we're doing, we can work as an industry and work together, and that's how we came together. So we became friends. Besides being competitors, I mean, we were friends, and we were doing like stuff together. And 1 year later, Ben and Pablo, Ben is the CTO, and the other of the co-founders talked with me and said, like, look, man, we're competing for the same customers, the same investors, the same the same everything. So how about if we go together? And we did a negotiation, and then it was a good timing because Unisend Mexico closed, and I joined Bitso, and Unisend Argentina was acquired by another big player over there called Ripio. So it was also a good timing, and that's how I became VP at Bitso and was there for about 5 years afterwards.
Awesome. Yeah. So a lot of collaboration, a lot of growth, and it sounds like you're probably one of the OGs of Mexico in cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably not the first one. I've met people that are before me, but I must say that, well, I've been one of the persons that have done the most community events, educations. For example, some of the biggest events that have happened in Mexico were organized or co-organized by me. For example, the Latin American Bitcoin Conference, we did it in 2015. We did that at my university. I helped get all it all in place. I mean, and also other big events, because if you don't make first education and also people to get to know them, and first it's a mystery and it's fear, like, what is this magic thing, and I'm gonna be scammed, or it's a pyramid scheme, or my money's gonna disappear if I erase this, etc. No, so first is this fear that, look, we're people like you and we're handling this, and if you can handle your Instagram and your Facebook, you probably won't have any problem handling this stuff. And the other was the educational and also the media and the regulation part, because at the time, I mean, Bitcoin mostly has had a very bad reputation always with regulators, because they try to always, like politicians, no, like send you mud on top, so it's saying that you're dirty. So at the time, Bitcoin, for example, all day, every day, regulators, central bankers, Securities and Exchange Commissions from all the country were saying that the only use case for Bitcoin was Silk Road, so illegal markets, drugs, human trafficking, kidnapping, and all the worst crimes that you thought in the world were all thanks and enabled to Bitcoin. So at the time, that's the only thing that they spoke, and also Mt. Gox. Like, you had this exchange with 70% of the world volume, and it became a Ponzi, and now they stole everyone's money. So if you get into Bitcoin, you're getting into that. Dark markets and Ponzi schemes. So you better watch out and you get it. So also was changing that narrative. Okay, this can happen, but this is this small. Look what you can do in Mexico. You can do remittances, international payments. It's one of the countries with more chargebacks in the world, frauds. Like, you can avoid all this stuff that is going on with this technology. And only focusing on that little part that happened to a couple of startups, you're looking into a whole industry that at the time was growing, but it wasn't so big too. And I mean, at that time, Bitcoin was like $100 million, the market cap, nothing. It was like 1,000 times smaller than today.
Yeah, definitely the barrier to entry for most people is just having the understanding of what is the cryptocurrencies, you know, how do they work, what are they being used for today, how can they be used for in the future, and you know, the constant innovation that is happening with these technologies. And so obviously, as you know, education is paramount to that, and getting people educated to have the understanding of how these things can be applied in order to, benefit everybody in their life. And I mean, all those same things, all these bad crimes, and whether it's ransomware or it's different types of sex trafficking, weapons trafficking, all those things also happen with regular traditional fiat money. So, I mean, it's not exclusive to just cryptocurrency, like you said. But yeah, that's amazing. So let's kind of get into some of the current things that you're working on. We see you at the Mexican Senate, and it looks like there's going to be a really cool project that's starting, doing voting on the blockchain with the Mexican Senate. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So, although as I said, like I started knocking on the doors of regulators because I knew that eventually regulation had to happen, and it happened in Mexico in 2018. Mexico was one of the first countries to have a fintech law, so they started regulating and giving licenses to fintech companies. But there were also a lot of resistance, and I would say low blows from some regulators and from the central banks that tried to, as in every country, they tried to close down. For example, at that time, Bitso, where I worked, was the biggest exchange. It still is the biggest exchange in Mexico, and they tried to close it down various times. So something that we started doing was seeing that there were some unfair regulation and treatment legally and for Bitcoin and the blockchain industry, and they're trying to block us down as an industry. And there is where we started seeing that it was more complex than just convincing regulators, but they had a lot of powerful tools and weapons to shut us down, and they try to do it very aggressively. So at that time, there was once a time that they tried to very aggressively shut us down, and there was when I went to the Senate with, at that time, the head of regulation of Bitso, and we started knocking on doors of senators and saying how this very unfair law was targeting us and not anyone else, and that not any other industry had so unfair treatment and requirements.
How was that received?
And when we explained that to the senator, they said there was unfair and discriminatory, and that shouldn't happen. And why is that happening when you had an industry that was in growth and generating employment, investment, and income? It made no sense. But well, the central bank didn't want it to happen. So at the time, it was hard because it was December and it was almost Christmas, so there were very few senators like working in their office.
Right.
But that's when we found Senator Indira, and she was with her team, and she sat with us for like 3 hours and explained me everything, and why is this unfair, and why is this happening, and how does it happen in other industries, and what can we do, and why is this important, who will this benefit, or who will this make good or bad, etc. And she sat with us and really got interested in that, and she actually after that kicked that back. So that was very good for the whole industry, because they were asking all Mexicans to make an electronic signature each time that you did a transaction, cancel a transaction, did a trade, logged in, logged out. They don't ask that for any other industry. And
right.
they're asking for your taxing ID and your taxing to electronic signature for every transaction. I mean, that's something that doesn't happen normally. So she kicked that back, and then we started having another type of relationships, and for her to know how this industry was evolving, and she started getting involved. And last year, when I went with Eric of Chainbytes to El Salvador and live the experience, and she told me that she wanted to really see what was going on and get more involved, I told her, you should come to me with El Salvador, and we went to El Salvador. She was there for a week with her team, and she saw firsthand how Bitcoin was really working, not what media tells you or what
right.
because they have an opinion and they write articles, but they have never gone there. So that's really worthless. It's only an opinion. It's what they think could happen. It's not them actually going. So she went. She was there. She saw how it was happening. We had very interesting conversations with congressmen and congresswomen from El Salvador, secretaries of state, central bank, businessmen, associations of business, and we had like a 360 view. And then she told me that she wanted to work on creating a better regulation for all of this. So that is when I started collaborating with her and her team. And we started drafting some plans of things to do, and one of them was bringing the ATM. We had already talked about it last year when we were in El Salvador and the options. And it became a reality. In April this year, with Eric, we placed the first Bitcoin ATM in the Mexican Senate. And it was very cool because it was also the day a Bitcoin event was happening at the same time that we launched the ATM. I was also a speaker there, so other senators besides Indira and from other parties. In Mexico, there are lots of political parties, not like in the States that there are only two. But so other people from other political parties that normally ideologically or because of their parties are oppositions and they clash, because of this Bitcoin ATM and because of this different thematic, they were all together, no? So it was also funny seeing them for all the parties that are interested in this. So that's where we started with the Bitcoin ATM and also drafting the regulations in Mexico to change them. And now actually the senator has already sent out 8 different law reforms and new laws to pro-Bitcoin laws, pro-financial education, pro-technology, etc. to do this. And the next step, as you mentioned, is the Bitcoin ATM has a couple of screens, and it's an interactive screen that besides having the interfaces to buy and sell Bitcoin, they can be programmed for other activities. One of them will be to make voting in the Senate. How is this going to work? Well, every time there's a proposal, there's an initiative that must be voted either to approve or to decline it. And each senator has a vote, and after the vote, there's a count. So what we're going to do is a vote intention through the ATM, where every senator, before they go to vote or after they have voted, they'll be able to tap the screen, say for example, which party they represent, and if they vote in favor, if they vote to decline, or if they vote to I don't remember, not vote, to decline
abstain.
Voting. Abstain. So they can. So the objective is, there's various objectives. One of them is to see that this technology not only works for gambling and for trading and for other things like a public registry, for them to have it there. And the other is for them to see how you can also have this instant results with this technology, and also for them to lose the fear of going into the ATM and pushing, and you don't need to pay anything. It's just putting your voting intention for them to see how this actually works.
Awesome. What was the legwork that you had to do to really educate the senators on the technology so that way they could see the technology for what it really is, the ledger capabilities, and being able to vote and have that clear transparency of the data?
Well, it's an ongoing job. Like I would say that most of the senators have no idea how this technology works. Out of Mexico, there's 128 senators. I would say like up till now, 5 of them are familiar with Bitcoin, which is not even 10%. So what Indira has also been doing is some events, and also other senators to do some events, and also doing these meetings inside their political parties to first. It was an initiative by Indira. Now she's trying to do it as initiative as her political party, and then bring and bring over from other political parties. The most important one is right now the ruling party of the president. They have majority, so it's the most important one to have for these initiatives to pass. There's some that are very optimist. There's one for Bitcoin to be legal tender. I mean, it will be discussed, but I don't expect that to be approved. Of course, it would be great, but I don't expect that to be approved. But there's others that have a lot of chance to be approved, like, for example, including financial education and the use of virtual assets in public and private education programs.
Awesome. So there's still some groundwork that needs to be done just with the lawmakers and with the senators. But what does this mean essentially for the Mexicans of Mexico? Like, how do you feel that this is going to be able to substantially impact and benefit all of the citizens?
Well, first of all, in Mexico, as well as in most in Latin America, most people are unbanked. Most people will never have access to financial services because the only options that most people have for financial services are banks, and banks do not service the whole country. There's a lot of banks, and banking has been growing a lot in the last 20 years, but 50% of the population is unbanked. So for starters, you have a population of over 50 million people that have never had or will never have access to financial services, paying online, doing a transfer, or anything. So first of all is giving access to all that population. There have been some government, some public and some private initiatives and funding and projects to do this, but I would say that overall, unfortunately, I would consider it not a success because, for example, there have been some projects for QR payments, for online payments, interbank payments, and the last payment that the Mexican Central Bank did has been running for about 5 years, and they only have 1 million users. That's not even 1% of the population. That's nothing. I would consider that a failure. You go and you see Bitcoin, and you have 5 million users. With all the resistance, with all the harassment, with all the regulators and stuff, you have more users doing that than stockbrokers, more users doing that than the government central bank payment system. So there's a big opportunity. The other is not only using Bitcoin. I mean, I love Bitcoin, but it's I would say if you use it as money, it's also a little risky for normal people because of the volatility. But using it as a tool for financial services. And why do I mean for that? Using it as a rail of the back office of your services. For example, remittances, international payments, online payments. Like remittances, Mexico, U.S. is the biggest corridor that exists for remittances. It's the biggest income, bigger than oil for Mexican in dollars. So there you have a huge market. Then you have international trade. Of course, with the United States is one of the biggest. It's the biggest trade partner, but you also have Mexico has one of the most international trade treaties in the world. So they have a lot of business partners all over the world. And the other is actual financial access and personal and professional development. If you never have a bank account, if you never have access to credit, if you can never buy something online, you will, and you live in a small town, you probably will continue living in the same way for the 100, 200, 300 years, and you will have many of the advantages that are going on now. So this is a way to expand that and also to help with the people's development. And it's something that we have seen in some, for example, neighborhoods in El Salvador.
That's amazing. So there is a generational impact of cryptocurrencies that is going to be able to help generation after generation where people have traditionally been stuck, not being able to have a bank or being completely unbanked and having to maintain, their own funds and currency and have that as a risk.
Yeah, and I mean, also another thing that has happened in Mexico and in Latin America is, okay, besides all the things that most people that are into Bitcoin know about central banks, that they can issue unlimited money, inflation, taxes, etc., that there's a lot of ways to make them have more value of your money and for your money to be worth less. So that is one of the problems. But also you have in Latin America another problem that all the local currencies and the corruption makes the local currency be worth less against the dollar. So you always see all Latin American currencies being devaluated against the dollar. So then you have a double problem. You have the inflation and the devaluation of the states, and you have the devaluation and the inflation locally. So then it gets wild. Like in Mexico, I mean, the last big devaluation was in '94, but it was 300%. Like, what did you do when in a week you change your imports 300%? You go to Argentina, and when I started in Argentina, the exchange was 7 pesos per dollar. That was in 2013. Right now it's 200.
That's insane.
And that happens all
crazy.
over Latin America. Like, how can you trust your bank and how can you trust your currency long term? You can't.
Yeah. There's
You
zero
use gold,
stability
you
in
use
that.
silver, you use dollars, you use real estate, you use other stuff. So it's also another option for the people. For example, also especially in people like in Venezuela and Argentina, because also their countries do these laws where it's illegal for you to exchange your currency. So you're trapped. And if you want to exchange your currency, they define what's exchange rate and how much you can change. That's ridiculous.
That is absolutely insane. Well, that would be one huge benefit for everybody to have something that really changes the game for everybody as far as financially being able to have a little bit more stability. Obviously, there's the volatility, in cryptocurrency, but I don't think you're going to find that swing to be that large.
No, and also, I mean, you can see all the criticism for the last 10 years in Mexico, Argentina, Venezuela, etc. Like, no, look at the volatility, etc. Okay, like, look at the medium and long-term performance of the local currency and Bitcoin against your local currency. Which one was a better option? You're going to have a short-term, yes, volatility, but if you put it, I wouldn't tell anyone put this, like, make this your whole portfolio, but have it as part of your portfolio. It has outperformed all stock indices and all Latin American currencies.
Right.
So it's worthwhile having a bit of that in your portfolio and your long-term savings.
Okay. Let's talk about Bitcoin Santiago and what that's all about.
Yeah, so last year we had our first experiment with Eric trying to open an operator in El Salvador. We did an experiment over there. We also did some like 3 prototypes in a factory, but at the end it was a little bit hard because all the parts needed to be imported, and El Salvador wasn't a huge market for electronic components and technology components, so it was a little bit hard. So that was our first adventure, like creating a company and ventures in Latin America with Eric and myself. I mean, we had done stuff and cooperated, but not an actual company or a venture. This was the first one. After that, I convinced Eric that, well, maybe things didn't go like we planned in El Salvador, but Mexico was a great opportunity. There's only like 20 ATMs in Mexico. I mean, you compare it to other countries, even in Latin America, and there are very few. You have other countries with 150 at least, smaller countries.
Well, with the large population of unbanked, there's just not a large user base for them.
And then you see numbers in the United States and Europe, and it's wild. You have over 1,000, and I mean in the United States, it's wild that they have around 20,000 ATMs. But when I told there was this huge opportunity, it's mostly a cash economy, all the unbanked. People want something physically, and many of them don't trust even their online banking. So the opportunity is there, and I started telling Eric we should do something here, and there's how we opened the operator, which is Ajolote Bitcoin. We opened an operator here in Mexico, and we started looking into parts that would be good, of course, for business, but also interesting places where we could have a bigger impact. So we have some interesting partners. I mean, commercially and business-wise, the first one that we'll be announcing soon and that we're negotiating. They have many of the biggest malls in Mexico. They have over 20 malls in Mexico, so we're going to start with them. But the non-commercial part, like the Senate, in which we see we can have an impact, one of them is a municipality in Nuevo León. Nuevo León is in the upper northern border of Mexico to Texas, and that's where Senator Indira is from. And so when we went to Nuevo León, we went around and we saw many places, some of them which we had already spoken, some of them which were new to explore putting the ATMs, and one was Santiago. Santiago is a town like about an hour away from one of the most important cities in Nuevo León, which is called Monterrey, and it's one of the main tourist spots in the state. They tell us that they have around 10,000 tourists from all over every weekend. They have it just in this small plaza. So there's a lot of people in very little time every weekend. So there, the Senator Indira introduced us to the municipal president, and we started talking with him, and he said that he was all into business and technology and modernization, that he had already done, for example, placing, he said, like, no one here had online payments, card payments, and worst of all, when every U.S. or foreign visitor comes, where do they look? They look at TripAdvisor, they look at Airbnb, they look at all these international websites and applications, and we weren't there. So he also did like this huge campaign, having all onboarded, and he onboarded everyone in his town. So he has already done this type of efforts to make tourism grow and commerce grow and the economy grow, and he has had all these different campaigns. He cleaned up also the municipality. He won some international and national awards. So he has been really working into attracting and making it better for the tourism. And he said, like, if I already have all these options and this is already international money and there are people locally and foreigners that will be interested, like I'm interested in having one here. And right. I'll help you guys out also. We can build, for example, a kiosk for it. We can have it here, etc. And for people to not only start experimenting and buying Bitcoin, but in the future experimenting other things like paying for services.
But it also allows at the same time where you have these tourists and the tourism, comes in where they're, essentially from countries where they're used to using some cryptocurrency, using Bitcoin ATMs, but being able to also help in the process further the future education of the citizens of Mexico as to how they can also utilize that.
Yeah. Besides putting the curiosity and doing like the PR and marketing, like, you have a Bitcoin ATM or you accept Bitcoin payments, you also need to have a community and users that actually use it. Because if not, after the announcement, it's going to die off and they're not going to be used. So that's some of the activities we have also spoken with the municipal president that we want to do. We want to have meetings with the Association of Hotels, the Association of Restaurants, the Association of Commerce, and give them incentives to also do this and accept payments. And then they say, okay, I already accepted your weird money. Now how do I cash out? Okay, just take 10 steps and go to the ATMs and push this and you're going to have your money in your hand. And so also it's also doing those communities, events, meetups, and incentivizing the people to use it for it to create this local economy for this, and not only waiting for a foreigner or from someone to be curious, he has Bitcoin payments. We're actually activating this locally, and for them having like, okay, you won't be charged 5, 7, 8, 10% that you're charged, for example, with their card. You won't have your money, like if you want to save your money, you can do it, and you don't need to have it always on your pocket and having it.
There has to be an incentive immediately, and at least spark some curiosity to want to get some education on the matter, so that way they can decide for themselves.
Yeah, and that's also the same strategy that we're doing also for the commercial spots. It's not only like, you can pay and almost be anywhere, but that's not the objective. The objective is creating this working and strategy and promoting groups for this to be a success. So, for example, with everyone that we are creating deals, there are also people that are at least into this stuff. Probably they're not experts, but they're into it and they see the potential and they understand the potential for this. And they also want to work together with us creating these strategies because if, for example, in the malls, if the Bitcoin ATM it's a success inside the mall, it will also mean that they're going to have more visitors and different kind of visitors for their malls over time. So it was a great investment for them, and they will be happy, and we will be happy. So with all the ones that we're doing these deals is creating this strategy. So we're going to have meetups, we're going to have educational events, we're going to have activations. You're going to also do PR marketing and activations on your side. And that's how we're going to try to create all this growing economy.
Awesome. So I know when I talk with a lot of different business owners, one of the first things that starts to kind of come up around this is regulations. And so you've kind of alluded to it, and you have a very unique perspective where you've been able to see regulations from an exchange point of view, but now you also have the peer-to-peer transactions, or that two-party transaction, happening at a Bitcoin ATM. What are the regulations like in Mexico for you as an operator?
So there isn't like a Bitcoin law or a cryptocurrencies or a blockchain law. At the beginning of the fintech regulation that started in Mexico in 2018 to regulate all the fintech industry, it was contemplated, but afterwards it was taken out. So actually, Bitso was the first company to have a license, but they didn't give him a license as a cryptocurrency exchange or as a Bitcoin exchange or as a Bitcoin custodian or as a wallet. They gave them as an electronic payment wallet. That was the license that you had. So you're only regulating this little part. So what they needed to do was create another company and to migrate the company to Gibraltar, where you did have a regulator. Because if you don't have a regulation, you can, as a startup, you can be running for some months, some years. But afterwards, it's a risk for you, it's a risk for your investors, it's a risk for your employees. Like, they can shut you down any day. So they started doing a strategy to be in countries that they were regulators. So it's funny, like in Mexico, when you deposit your Mexican pesos, it gets digitalized and it's digital pesos. That's the only part that it's regulated, and that's the company that exists here. Then it goes outside and it goes to another country. That country where you have all of this regulated. So this is only your on-ramp and off-ramp, and this is the other part. So there is still a lack of regulation and regulatory clarity and guidelines to create this. So it doesn't exist. It must be included. I mean, it must be updated, but it has been already very hard for the government for fintech. So they have more headaches with Bitcoin and blockchain, and they cannot understand. So that is on one part. The other part is how the business actually operates for us in the ATM, because we have also been exploring if we would need to have a license like them in order to operate. And we have been exploring that and speaking with different people and regulators and lawyers, etc. The Bitcoin ATM works differently. There's no custody of your funds. It's like a self-service. And right. I've also been learning this through practice. And so ATM, you go with your cash, you pass your KYC, you get identified as a user, you get verified, and afterwards you set that Bitcoin, you have that cash, they give you this exchange rate, and then they send you out your Bitcoins. So it's an instant self-service where there is no custody of the funds, and where the country transfers from his money in his pocket to his money in his home, for example. So what we've seen is that these self-serving vending machines would not need to have this kind of license, but we need to make some reports that regulators ask. So after first of all, of course, the KYC AML that we do, that we need to have all the data of all the people that are operating there, and also need to classify them depending on how much money they transact. No, after some threshold, more information needs to be done.
So it's very similar to what we do here in the United States. It's all going to be a risk-based AML program. You're collecting up your KYC information. Large transactions come through. You investigate those to make sure that the source of funds match up, and that way you're able to stop things like money laundering. How about fraud and scams? Are those things also pretty rampant throughout Mexico?
Yeah. So the only thing that there's one thing that you need to report. So every trade above like $2,600, all of them need to be reported always. So that is something that the regulator invented here in Mexico, and that's how they comply. So all transactions. And then the biggest risk that I've seen in Mexico are pyramid schemes and scams. More than money laundering, more than organized crime, more than drug money or El Chapo, whatever. Those do happen, and there have been some cases of money laundering and part of the money being used on Bitcoin, but that's like risky. And this little case, the most usual crime that I've seen is pyramid schemes and Ponzi schemes. So all of these people that tell you, like, if you give me your money, I'll give you twice as much in 3 months, and you're going to invest in Bitcoin, and we're going to be doing trading with this artificial intelligence bot that also invests and moves around and does staking and mining, and also
we've got awesome AI that lets us know trade signals, and we're going to make a lot of money.
And there's weed growing out with the best THC that we're gonna sell in California, and they invent you these great stories, but all of them are scams. And there's a lot of people that by ignorance or greed or simply trust get into this. So yeah, that is a big problem. But there are also ways, maybe not to prevent this, because educational is the only way. But sometimes people, and I have spoken with scammers and people that have been scammed, and when you tell them beforehand, they get angry. It's my money. You're not going to tell me what to do with my money. Okay, it's your money. You're free to do, but you're going to get scammed. So there's also a lot of ways. I wouldn't say like preventing education, but afterwards there are lots of ways where you can trap this. Like if you go to the blockchain, you're actually going to see how it's a pyramid scheme, how all these little wallets go to the same wallet, and they do a distribution, and then you start exploring that, and it makes no sense. And you go and see there's no investment. They're not sending it to Binance or to Bitfinex, etc., unless it's sending it to steal the money. So it's not going round. So that is a problem. But another way is also to identify those wallets and to start blocking them, for example.
Yeah, flagging them through the different blockchain analytic tools, and then stopping those transactions from going through. There's so many different things that can really be helpful on the consumer protection side, in addition to education. Obviously, the education, as you know, is primary to helping people protect themselves, but there's also no real safety net to protect yourself from yourself. As you said, emotionally, you get your heartstrings pulled, and next thing you know, you're doing something that you probably normally wouldn't because you want to help somebody out, and then you find out, wow, I've just been scammed. But we have the same thing here stateside. A lot of different consumer protection laws kind of go in place. They don't necessarily stop, the fraud and the scams from taking place. And, when we help from a compliance standpoint, talking with the different customers and trying to explain it, we get the same thing. Hey, this is my money. I'm going to do what I want to do with this. And we're like, okay, as long as you understand you're likely being scammed at this moment, and all sales are like this are final, irreversible on the blockchain.
Yeah, and plus, in most countries, it's illegal to withhold your customers' funds. So you can legally get into problem for that. So there's so much you can do.
Oh, man. So tell me about Cafe Iguana. How does this kind of play in with everything? You guys have a machine place there?
Yeah, so Well, we were over there looking at the locations. I told Eric about this Cafe Iguana. It's in the downtown of Monterrey. And it has a very interesting story. So the part that it's in downtown, it was like this, where all the clubs and bars and all the nightlife happened like 20 years ago. And it was like this place that everyone wanted to go in the weekends. The streets were closed. People were in the streets going from bar to bar. It was a lot of fun. But then organized crime started growing. Organized crime is a problem in Mexico because of all the the drug cartels, etc. So there are some big ones that, when they grow a lot, they start having control over some towns. And well, they started having control over this town that was a nice place to go out to party, but then you started seeing lots of drugs, lots of shady security that wasn't security. So them having control, extortion, drugs, security, who got in, who got out, and etc. No, so it started growing a lot, and then they started having more problems because they started growing too much, the organized crime, and they started asking for more money and more problems. So Cafe Iguana is one of the most popular bars and spots. It's quite big. You can place there 3,000 people, and they have a auditorium for 2,000 people. So it's actually a big place, and you can, for being a bar. And also some of the best bands have gone and played there internationally. For example, there's this band that I like that you don't see commonly that's called Diablo Swing Orchestra, and the first time that I saw them, it was in that place.
It was
and,
there.
yeah, and a lot of bands that normally rock and metal bands that go and only play there because they know
I
that's
googled
the spot.
cafe. I googled it and I brought it up and I saw the picture and I was like, wow, this is an interesting place. But I mean, just the fact that as you're walking in, all you see is the building, the facade of it is riddled with bullet holes.
Yeah. So things started escalating, and between government, the association of bars being fed up, and the cartel, they started like having this. And one day, the cartel got pissed off, and they went like, if it was Al Capone in 1920, and they just went with machine guns and started shooting to everyone in the entrance.
No way.
And many people got harmed, some people got killed. And the owner said, like, I'm not going to close my place, I'm going to fight back, and I'm not going to fix this so everyone can see what happened here and the history of what can be the worst case scenario. And after that happened, I mean, they had to do an aggressive intervention here to clean this up. So right now it's a very nice tourist spot that it's actually, they cleaned it up. They closed the streets for people to walk. It's no longer, there are a lot of bars and restaurants, but it's not like it used to be, like only clubbing, but it's now a family place. It's one of the places that people go and take the most photos because they cleaned it up, they painted, they made it a very nice tourist spot. But well, that place, Cafe Iguana, was one of my favorite bars over there, and we met with the owner, and he said like, okay, let's do it. And besides having the Cafe Iguana, I also rent some other little shops, and I know all the people here. He has been there for decades, so I think that's going to be also another cool spot in which we can do this also little economy.
So what's the footprint of your operation? How many machines do you have right now deployed?
Right now, I mean, we have 3. Our plan is to having 15. We need, right now we need to have some more, but well, they're on the way. They take some time, but the objective is in a month to have at least 15 operational ATMs already. The first ones, the first batch arrived, and the other ones are on the way. So Monterrey, Nuevo León will be one of the places, and Mexico City, which we're going to start operations and where we're going to have most of this first batch of ATMs.
So do you have targeted education plans specific for that area in that community?
Yes. So, as I said, for example, in the malls, we are going to do a series of events. That's on one place. Also, in the municipalities, I mean, there's going to be events, and we also want to have people there full time that can be available to educate and to teach people. And besides that, well, I also run BlockchainLand, which is an event that we're going to do in Monterrey from the 5th to 7th of October. That's massive events that we do for education, personal development, and professional development. And so the event is called Talentland. That's an event that we do every year, and we do a massive event. Our first event before the pandemic was for 62,000 people.
Wow.
We had the last event in July. There were 25,000 people. Besides the COVID restrictions, we still had a lot of people. And then what we do is we divide it by, let's say, lands, which are, the event is like Disneyland. So you have blockchain land, you have developer land, you have creative land. So what we're doing right now, we're taking blockchain land and we're doing an event by itself. We're doing a 10,000 people event, and with that objective, for people to get educated any age and any level, from if you are a teenager, or if you're having your first experience in Bitcoin and blockchain, or if you're a developer, there's going to be content for everyone. So that is an ongoing event that I do. We're going to do it this year twice. Next year there's going to be 4 events. So that's something I have ongoing for education and for for people to get to know what all of this is about. And well, besides that, I also try to be very active in events as a speaker, and also writing articles and doing this educational stuff and workshop. Besides that, what we want to do in the operator of the ATMs is having a team for doing that. No, so
I see you pretty well dispersed out there, whether it's out there in crypto Twitter or it's online, seeing your videos, specifically the ones from where you're speaking at, like BlockchainLand at the Talentland events. There's a lot of stuff that's out there, a lot of content that you've curated. So you definitely are a wealth of knowledge. What is your experience as far as Mexico and specific to mining of cryptocurrencies? Is there a lot of that going on? Is that still, something that's getting, caught on to there, or have people of Mexico been doing that for a while?
Well, I've known people that have been doing mining. That was also some of my first businesses in 2013, 14. It's a hard business because of your income is super volatile, and more volatile than most.
A lot of competitors now.
And right now also a lot of competition. I know that there are some people that have been running some big serious operators. I mean, that not people running a rig with 4 or 3, but people actually spending some millions of dollars in some data centers to convert them to mining facilities. I know of 2-3 people that have show me that they're doing that, and most of them are people that already have the cheap energy capacity, and also have the infrastructure to do this, or they are renting it out to people that are doing this business. But I don't see it a lot, but I have seen some operations, some big operations, and from time to time, I mean, there's some friends, for example, in stockbrokers that told me hey, I have this customer that has all these huge companies, and he also has now this little warehouse that he's mining, and he just said that, I'm just going to put $1 million into this and just have fun.
Well, that might be successful. It might not.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Jose, I really appreciate your time today. If folks want to connect with you, where can they find you?
Yeah. So on all social networks, you can find me as Jose Pimpo at JOSEPIMPO. So in Twitter, Instagram, etc. You can find me like that. Also, for example, if you're interested in Talentland or BlockchainLand events, we have in the web pages our contact forms if you want to contact me, and also, for example, in the Twitter of BlockchainLand on Talent Republic, there's my data, or we have always opened the messages for anyone that wants to contact us. I mean, it could be through email, it could be through social networks, or through our web pages.
Okay, well, fantastic. I hope some of our listeners who hear this, maybe some of them are moved, and maybe they'll even come out and see you in person at BlockchainLand at your next come-in event here. It's just a few weeks away.
Yeah, I mean, only in my event or any event in Latin America, probably gonna be there. So very happy to be there, and well, also in the next weeks when we're gonna be starting, if you're in Mexico, when we're gonna be starting our events with the ATMs.
Fantastic. Well, we're looking forward to seeing a lot more from you, Jose, and looking forward to seeing your impact on the industry. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Wow, so that was a really great conversation that I was able to have with Jose. Eric, obviously, one of your closer friends. He did a really good job of painting a picture about, his 15 years of experience in financial services, which that in itself is quite the feat. And then, having him actually learn about Bitcoin in 2011 and taking a time, to make his first official purchase of Bitcoin in 2013 is really, really interesting. Did you know that about Jose?
You'd be surprised how many people heard about it and dismissed. I dismissed it initially as well and didn't buy it right away. I was like, yeah, it's some nonsense, and didn't really take an honest look at it, and then had to take a second look. And then the second look, and when I read the white paper, your eyes open up. And until you use it, you really just, it's hard to explain even today. So yeah, a lot of people are the same way. They dismissed it initially, and then later on, when there was hype or some other opportunity presented itself. So yeah, I wasn't aware that he hadn't heard about it in 2011. Nice.
Yeah, so a friend obviously helped him get to the point where he was orange pilled, and then it took him a while in order to make that first initial purchase. I also thought it was pretty interesting, his whole venture as far as beginning or opening up an exchange, Unisend Mexico. I had no idea about that. And then obviously the acquisition by Bitso, really significant stuff, for the country of Mexico.
Yeah, I remember when he was in Argentina doing that, and that's one of the most difficult places to operate. But he had an exchange there. He had an exchange in Mexico, I believe, as well. That Bitso acquired. I think he acquired both of them, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, I remember I was in Texas with him actually when the guys from Bitso were there, and Barry Silbert, and a week later they were being acquired.
Awesome. And then one of the other things that we kind of talked about, which is also near and dear to my heart, is the education of not just the people, but also, the lawmakers within the country. So we kind of got into a little bit of some of the projects that you and he are working on. And one of those things is the voting on the blockchain and the education of the technology to the senators there.
Well, it'll get them thinking a little differently, I think, and that was the approach. They're talking about Bitcoin as money and money laundering and all of these things. And I was like, well, let's just change the topic. How about if we vote on the blockchain? No, we won't even use it as money. We'll just vote on it and create transparency. Who's going to argue against that? And that resonated with them, and they said, yeah, if you build it, we'll do it. And we built it, so we're planning on doing it now.
Right.
Yeah, I'm excited about that.
And I mean, it's a great story, to basically go through the process of having the understanding of the technology before you even get to the point where someone's going to, propose a question of, okay, can we now make Bitcoin legal tender? These senators need to understand and have faith in the underlying technologies that support that. So I thought that was a really great conversation with Jose there. And then
I was there. I mean, it's good. It was fun watching the senators use it, and just like any other person, their eyes open. I'm like, that's it. That's how it works. It was so simple. Yeah, that's why this technology is going to survive, and you should be an advocate for it. And so I think that resonated well. I think we've done a good job in the Senate, educating them and leaving people there and talking to them about it. And I think that's going to have a good impact on them. But Whether or not they pass any laws, who knows? Politicians.
That's my favorite part is watching people get educated and them having that light bulb moment. And I think that's just one of those phenomenal things that we get to witness. And then, dispelling the bad reputation that sometimes Bitcoin has that's really FUD that's out there. But then, just talking about some of like where people thought that the only use case of Bitcoin was going to be on the dark market and Ponzi schemes, which,
Just like the internet. The internet was just going to be illegal and pornography, right? That's it.
And it's so much more.
So is Bitcoin, and that's definitely something I think is important that people understand. Is this is a lot more than just going to be money and changing money. It's going to change the way you think about money. It's going to change the way you interact with people, and it's we'll get there.
He also talked a little bit about when you and he went to El Salvador, which was quite interesting. And I know that I heard a little bit from you about your trip, going down there, but you guys had a lot going on.
Well, it was an exciting time. I mean, they just legalized Bitcoin. We started a factory there. I'm sure he talked about that. We were looking at everything and anything that we could take and disrupt, and there's still opportunity there. We're still doing things there. It's exciting.
And then he also went on to kind of talk a little bit about Bitcoin Santiago, which you have a role in also.
Yep. Well, we're going to roll it out and try to help merchants accept Bitcoin. It's sort of an experimental area within Mexico that they allow these types of things, interaction, and so we're going to do it. And the mayor's firmly behind it, so that'll be another thing we'll be announcing here shortly. Yeah.
So did you and he have any challenges that you can specifically remember as far as creating ventures inside Latin America so far?
Oh yeah, I mean, we created a company in El Salvador that took about a month, and a stack of paper like this, and Mexico was a little bit better. It went through pretty easily. It's a little trickier, I guess, but yeah, it's tricky. And then of course doing banking and business and just in general, it is a little different. It's a little more. In the United States, you form a company, click, 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 and that's certainly not the way that it is there. And to get your tax number, it doesn't work. It takes a process. In El Salvador, the reason it took a month is physically the guy had to have physical paperwork with a physical signature, no digital signatures, and go to the different departments within the government to get signatures to form the company. And it's an attorney. That to me just seems insane. But those things are being improved, including in El Salvador. They realize that it's an antiquated system, and so they're looking to revamp it. Mexico is not nearly like that, but I guess you're a little spoiled when you're in the U.S. and you just go online and you have a company in 5-10 minutes. You can't do that there.
Yeah, definitely can't do that there. But we also have a lot more regulations around, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and in Mexico they have a limited number of regulations so far. Obviously, those things will.
Yeah, they really have much of anything except the tech. They have what they call the tech law.
Right.
I forget exactly what they call it, but that doesn't apply to everything within technology as it sounds. But they'll form their regulatory stuff, I guess.
And then lastly, we talked about Cafe Iguana and the history, which was just mind-blowing, to kind of hear about what had happened there at Cafe Iguana and how the owner wants to place a Bitcoin ATM, in the establishment.
Yeah, one of the things it did there was created a community. So Cafe Iguana is sort of the center of that community, and there's merchants, and so, I think that'll be an exciting time to see what happens there.
Okay, well, I guess there's a lot of listeners out there. We want to thank you all for listening. Any of our notes that we have, we'll go ahead and make sure that they're posted with this episode. And then we have a teaser for our next episode, which is with Amboss. Awesome. Lightning Node marketplace. And we'll be doing an interview, with the individuals from Amboss. So check out our show. Make sure you're hitting subscribe, and we'll be out there talking to you next time.